I won't be taking questions right away. I will introduce Broglio, and then we'll have a joint discussion. How philosophy and aesthetics can help us rethink the relationship between humans and the environment. He's author of Surface Encounters, Thinking with Animals and Art, coming out in a month, is that correct? On Minnesota, and Technologies of the Picturesque from 2008. Broglio is currently working on Animal Revolutions, Events to Come, an artistic and theoretical treatise on posthumanism and animal studies and romantic ecologies.
Yeah, so one of the things I thought to do was to simply go through some of the themes that we've touched on already, and maybe not bring them together, but highlight some of these elements. I'm sort of between worlds here. The Animal Revolutions book. Toward that end, I'd like to just spend a little bit of time thinking about the opening of von Uexku's Stroke of the World of Animals and Men. It was recently retranslated, as some of you may know, in the Minnesota Posthumanist series as a foray into the world of humans and animals. And it's an interesting difference in translation, and if we have time, you know, we can I can spend a lot of time talking about that differences. But the more recent translation is a bit more, I think, scientifically rigorous too by semiotics, in the way that the other is a bit, seems a bit more poetic. And what's interesting about, Wendy's already wonderful work on a lot of this, and Linda Williams earlier had talked a good bit about von Uexku. So this is sort of from the beginning of the stroll. Now, in the more recent edition, this is about a page and a half, and it was 2 pages into the essay. In the edition that was done, the translation that was done in the 1950s and then published again in semiotic in the 1980s, this is the very beginning. Okay? And I've tried to get with a translator, and we've gone back and forth, and he's not sure why that happened. Perhaps it should be called a stroll into unfamiliar worlds, worlds strange to us, but known to other creatures, manifold and varied as the animals themselves. And you initially think, you know, one caught by in this is, in initially reading, I think, okay, well, we're on a stroll, and this means this clearly metaphorically, right? This is like Heidegger talks about the vague, the path of thought, right? And so, okay, this is a sort of path of thought he must be setting out here. And Heidegger, of course, knew Uexku, and they sort of, you can see mutual influences. Okay, so it's a path of thought. But then the best time to set out on such an adventure is on a sunny day. And I think to myself, well, wait a minute now. Is this an actual stroll? Okay, and I'm interested in this relationship between a sort of physicality and literalism and the metaphor for thinking. And the indeterminacy in which he places the reader in this, I apologize, this is quite just a close reading, but I hope it's in some way evocative or provocative for discussion. The place that he then puts the reader in this, in the place, a flower-strewn meadow, humming with insects, fluttering with butterflies. Okay, maybe this is literal, and there they are. Here we may glimpse the worlds of the lowly dwellers of the meadow. And then, so here we may glimpse the worlds of the lowly dwellers. So if we've been moving between a literal and a metaphorical, how are we to understand the world of world? In other words, is world a metaphor, or is it something literal? And perhaps that's too much of a clear-cut dichotomy, but I hope you can see what I'm getting at here, which is this problem that worlding is, as Heidegger would go on to work with, physical comportment, phenomenology, being in the world. And yet, the think of world is often posed as a type of metaphor. Okay? That is, it's structured around a variety of linguistic metaphors. And before I forget, I will gesture to the fact that that idea of it being structured around the linguistic metaphors is, as Heidegger would say, that language is the house in which man dwells. It could also be said to be the web in which we are caught. And this is going to be, as I'm going to gesture in a minute, a type of problem in that if animals can't get outside of their world, right? So he says, Heidegger will say animals can't get outside their world. But humans, using these sort of scaffolding or ladder of metaphysics, have a verticality about them by which they can have a look around. Right? And this is what makes the distinction. So animals are immanent to their world, but humans have this verticality by which they can look around. And but it is perhaps that we are also caught within our own web making. In which case we have to say, are there distinctions, this gesture you're making, are there actually distinctions in creativity then? Right? So to continue just a bit, I'm sorry, is to do so we're in this stroke, to do so we must first blow in fancy a soap bubble around each creature to represent its own world. Right? And of course, I don't know about you, the first time I came across that, it's really getting a bit strange, the soap bubble bit. To blow a soap bubble around each creature. And so again, you shift into this idea that it's a metaphor, that I'm blowing this bubble. But that bubble that I'm blowing around the creature is representative. Okay, so it's metaphorical, it's representative of something that, he says, actually, for the animal exists, which is its Umwelt. Right, and he coins the term, well known, right? So it's actually existing, but we're using this bubble as an idea in order to demarcate difference, I guess. And we ourselves represent the world filled with perceptions which it alone knows. And I'll bracket that for a minute, but I think that might be useful in itself. When we ourselves step into one of these bubbles, the familiar meadow is transformed. Many of its colorful features disappear, others no longer belong together, but appear in new relationships. And I'm interested in what happens when we step into this bubble. So, many of the colorful features disappear, others no longer belong together. And in stepping in this bubble, this sort of disorientation we get, it's a difficult move, right? Because if we're in the Umwelt of the animal, then the colors don't disappear because there's no absence for the animal of the color. It's not like it knew that there was a color red, and it's like, wow, I really miss having red around, because it never knew that color. In other words, it's, as Uexku will say later in the text, the world of the animal is complete in itself. It's not that it needs something else. So if it's complete in itself, then it's not like it's missing or lacking. And we can gesture to poor and world, and that's going to be an extended conversation. But it's not that it's lacking in itself. So the soap bubble slash Umwelt, because now we can make a distinction there. It's a soap bubble for us, it's an Umwelt for them, is a problem of translation, right? Because he has the mind of the human. Oh, it's lacking certain things. It doesn't have this and that relationship. And yet, while in that world, it's complete in itself. I would have to be a bat in order to understand what it's like to be a bat. So which means that there is an objective knowledge, we know that it's something to be a bat, of which we can never access. So there's an actual thing which we can never access. And so, of course, in the rest of the text is Uexku sort of working around that through issues of how the animal interacts in its world. Right? What its perceptors and effectors do, and so the marks that it makes in its world and what it reacts to in that world. And this is where the surface of the human world, our Umwelt, comes up against the Umwelt of the animal. It's not the animal's perceptual world. So again, it's that problem. If I'm stepping into the Umwelt of the animal, then I don't care about the village street. I care about, I'm sensory to something else. But instead, what's visualized is this deprivation, right? Or this problem to relationality. And of course, you've seen the lamp, and the chandelier, and the one with the dog. And you notice this illustration is slightly different than the one, right? And this problem of scale, right? The problem of time that was gestured to for this the idea that humans see things at 1/18th of a second. The snail times the snail's reaction is, of course, much slower, and also a fighting fish, which is much faster, 1/50th of a second. So here, a very fundamental parameter, time, is works at different scales. And this is, I think, gestured to something that Krika was getting at in his talk, was that animals and insects provide a mode of access to an invisible. Right? And I think that they reveal to us sets of relationships of which we cannot normally see. And so studying colony collapse for the bee, or studying other types of their interactions to things that we are not sensitive to, gives us a window onto other possible worlds. And of course, one of the gestures here, it might be, if we talk about the issue of the invisible, is Merleau-Ponty's visible and invisible, which you might have already been thinking about gesturing to, right? Which is that in Merleau-Ponty's late in his life, and not published during his lifetime, the visible and invisible, he comes to the problem of realizing that phenomenology is always structured around subject-object relationships. And can he get outside? So that's the problem with Descartes. And phenomenology was supposed to solve this problem in some way, but it still constitutes human perception of objects. And can we get outside of that type of perception? And this is sort of one of the things I think you do in insect media, is to say, along with Deleuze and Whitehead, that in fact the subject is based on the prehension of its objects, which is to say that the subject is a nexus or an inflection point, an event point in which other things begin to come together. It is the phenomenal world of the animal is not an animal claiming a world, but it's a particular gathering activity, a particular gathering of activity that constitutes the animal. So the gathering of activity that we saw in this sort of BBC film bit is the constitution then of that particular animal, right? And how we come to understand it. And then in what's happening to insects, whether they be military insects or a colony collapse, is a way of us coming to terms with a shared earth between the human Umwelt and an animal Umwelt, and realizing sort of an ecological crisis between these shared worlds, right? We just we do use technological means, that is, we bootstrap ourselves with that sort of technogenesis as a way of trying to access some of these worlds, right? So we use quantitative measuring and other wave frequency, numbering, etc., as ways of trying to get access to these invisible worlds, or these umwelts, or these soap bubbles, right? So we use a variety of technologies, whether they're very, very small film cameras, etc., in order to try to get access. And yet, we have to think of all the perceptual apparatus that these other animals have, in which case we lack. Right? So Heidegger, while saying that the animals point world, also says that they have, and this is in Agamben as well, that they have an open which is inaccessible to us. Right? So if you think about it, they have an open that is inaccessible to us. And I think that's a really poetic opportunity to begin to think of a space of wonder and a space of thinking outside of human phenomenology and a sort of wonder at an animal phenomenology. And I'll just end sort of quasi slight leap here, just to say that I think Uexku gives us a type of thick description, or a sort of new natural history, which is to say, a natural history that's embedded in its object of study. It's aware of its own fragility as a mode of inquiry, and a fragility rather than a mastery. So it's a natural history without a sense of capturing the animal, without manipulating it and controlling it. So this is not a capture in sort of Damien Hirst's pickled beasties, but rather a stroll. A stroll is a sort of a disorientating Matthew Barney disorientation and reinvention alongside the worlds of alien others.
Heidegger says, doesn't he, this is not to say that the animal worlds are inferior. The animal worlds may have something, I'm paraphrasing, which is incomparable. We simply can't know it. But in other words, we're dependent on the invisible. We're dependent, and the invisible is even wrong, isn't it? We're dependent on worlds, not all of which we can see. You know, each organism has its own Umwelt, well, own Umwelt. Organisms have their own Umwelt, and we're dependent on them. The extra point I want to make, though, is that evolution is dependent on all this. And if those organisms aren't reading their world aright, at least in significant ways, then they're in trouble evolutionarily. In other words, this, you know, one knows that von Uexku is influenced by Kant. Actually, the implications of von Uexku go beyond Kant, because he is bridging with that notion of the marks, the signs, the signifying Umwelt. It's not just an environment, it's a signifying environment. He's bridging the idealism, realism problem. You know, that, yes, there must be reality in there, because evolution depends on it. So it's not just a sort of, I mean, I guess Kant was trying to think in an evolutionary way himself, actually, I come to think about it. But it's not just a sort of a world in which we make no contact with reality. If it were, no organism would evolve.
Well, I mean, I just think you're right. Giovanni had mentioned this with the spider-fly relationship, and this idea, of course, of Agamben, after giving Uexku's spider-fly example of the spider being sort of tailor, but unknowingly, right? And so Agamben says he doesn't know what's going on with the fly. But, you know, as you said, and as I've commented as well, in fact, evolutionarily, he does know, because if he didn't, that would be the spider that did not survive, and it would be another spider that passed. passed on to machines, etc. And so that's sort of assemblage, and then the gestures that we've been making all afternoon, the complexities now of those assemblages.
Yes, in other words, it's the assemblages which evolve, in fact. It's a coupling.
Yeah. My couple of comments are about evolution as well. I was just thinking about what von Uexku says about time fractions in perception worlds, and that they're contingent on predation, really, how long it can take to get eaten, fundamentally. I thought that was an interesting point. But apropos of Heidegger's notion of the pouring world, there was one example. I was reading that book again before I came to England. There's one example of the hen where the hen's own chick is black, because it's a black hen, and I forget how it's done, like a certain number of eggs are put with the hen, or chicks, or no, it must be eggs, and they all emerge as sort of golden chicks. And she turns on the black chick as the reject, which is her own chick, so it's that sort of chick. So I was just thinking of that sort of kind of non-Darwinian sense of excess, really. I mean, there is something very poor in world about turning on your own offspring, because of that. He uses it as an example of limited perception world, and I just wondered if you'd remembered that example and what you had to say.
I mean, I think it's interesting. It's also interesting that the scientist is setting up that particular situation, right? So, you know, we said, I'm interested in the sense that the scientist has set up a situation in which the example is the hen is limited in perception of world. And then I think of all the ways that we are limited in perception of world in our experiments, you know, in the real world, like Silent Spring as an example.
Sure.
Those sort of things. And so, yeah, you know, those failures will continue, right? And they will be evolutionary, right? In quite a marked way.
I thought that example that you showed of the spider that could mimic pheromones.
Yeah, exactly.
Different prey. It's amazing.
And also that was something that at von Uexku's time would have gone completely undetected, because the technology would have not been there scientifically to actually capture that data. So it really goes to show as well how our understanding of Umwelt, our mapping of the Umwelt, is so related to our technological, scientific tools. And what we think as well, I think it's always very important to keep an extreme open mind about what certain animals can do and what we think they can't do, because we seem to change our opinion every 20 years and quite radically. So that's also why I think it's very important today to have a focus on insects or anything else that has been discounted as machinic beyond.
That's right.
Yeah.
Was nothing poor in world about that complex bit of activity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Giovanni. I know that today we're not focusing on mammals and so on, but I have a question directly to Ron, really, about this idea of the soap bubble that's specific to each species, I guess, rather than individuals within the species, that's complete in itself. And I wonder whether von Uexku has anything to say about those instances that are usually between humans and mammals or birds on the whole. Let's take Donna Haraway and her dog, where two different species, or members of two different species, exist what it would seem rather perverse to call anything other than in a meaningful relationship, where is there anything in von Uexku that accounts for this kind of two sub-bubbles that kind of stick together for some period of time?
I say stroke the most man is man before he talks about the Umwelt of a lumberjack, and then of a astronomer, and of a little girl, and all of a sudden you think, well, wait a minute, we went from species to individual, and so it's not always quite clear the degree to which it is species or type specific, or sort of like a taxidermy is supposed stands in for the individual and the type, that sort of problem, or if, as you were talking at lunch, this question of degrees of freedom, that as there are more degrees of freedom, that perhaps there's a greater understanding of Umwelt. Now, in terms of shared Umwelt, and this is something that insect media does well, is to talk about Uexku's work on music, or they're picking up the themes of rhythm and music as a way of talking about these assemblages between different species or different animals. And I think we've done I don't know a lot of folks who've done that in terms of really putting together the Uexku and doulas and sort of extending that. So I think, yes.
On that note, Rob, I actually wanted to ask you more about this idea of completeness of the bubble. Because I was actually wondering, as you explained it, whether it's a comparative completeness or a completeness that can exist in itself. So, for instance, we've been discussing and kind of questioning Agamben's idea of the fly and the spider, and that the spider might not know the fly. But that way, if you apply the same doubt to the completeness or non-completeness of the two bubbles, I'm kind of wondering as well, if we claim, for example, that the spider has a knowledge of the fly, then what does that knowledge entail? And I'm wondering if the two bubbles have got anything to do with desire, the human bubble and our bubble, and the animal bubble, in a way, such way that they both are incomplete, even the animal one. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I mean, one of the breakthroughs for it in Uexku, and he mentions this in Stroll, is to say, I'm not interested simply in the individual animal. I'm interested in its world. Right? And so its world might include other animals, but never, of course, completely the other animal. We will never always already assimilate that other. But it is necessary for those animals' world. So you do have that sort of overlaps in interesting ways, and they mark and remark upon one another, as we saw with the wonderful sort of canvas being marked this afternoon, earlier today.
But also, I mean, if we're going to accept the fact that some animals have a theory of mind, then, of course they're going to project into other bubbles.
But mind extended into sort of biosemiotically, right? Exactly, which is to say, even materially or within its very flesh, right? Or you could say it says, its very flesh is its thinking. So.
But if one animal is capable of deceiving another, and even a dog can play a trick on a human, when I say even, they can playfully deceive. That presupposes quite a good grasp of this other Umwelt, to second guess.
Well, I think that's a very interesting point, and we were talking about the blue butterfly and how the blue butterfly exploits ants in order to fulfill its life cycle. It really poses a number of questions. Again, it's another sort of Agamben question on that level. The idea of how does the caterpillar, for instance, combine the Umwelt, the caterpillar's Umwelt, with the ant's Umwelt to such degree that the pheromone that the caterpillar spreads in the air attracts the ants, they recognize it as their own grub, take it down into the ant nest, then the caterpillar starts feeding on the baby ants, and when it's ready it emerges, and it's not detected as an external intruder by the ants because of pheromones. And again, is it the Agamben coincidence of not knowing, or is there some? It sounds like quite a sophisticated orchestration to be entirely up to chance and blindness.
Yeah, this is a question for you.
Great. I did put that bit about philosophical animal for you, so.
No, but it's about what you mentioned in the very beginning, and forgive me if I misunderstood some of the questions you raised, but it's about the art concept and about extending that and thinking through what is art. which is of course a big one. My concern is, I mean, humans are engaged in all kinds of creative activity that we do not choose to call art. So is the only way to acknowledge creative activity in non-humans, is the only way to acknowledge it, is that to call it art, or is that also not an anthropocentric trap to simply extend the definition?
Well, yes, I think there is definitely a point in what you say, the fact that, as I mentioned at the beginning when I discussed Agamben's perspective on what is art, I really believe she uses it instrumentally to stroke the ego of the reader and to make the reader feel better about the fact that they have an interest in art. So it's sort of self-fulfilling. I said art, it's more, much more than creating an object, and it's I see it as a network of negotiations, some of which involve money, involve texts, involve all sorts of platforms that the animal is not concerned with to start with, and effectively just by lifting it into the world of art. That's why I tried to push it down to creativity. You know, when I was saying, if you want to boil down art to the creative input, then effectively you do level down to a similar plateau, which of course Agamben was trying to completely prevent from happening.
I found interesting that with the examples you mentioned is that they're not simply they're traps, they're all traps, and in a way I think an artwork is a trap. I mean, an artwork traps ideas.
I think with the spiders, in a way, both spiders kind of placed something, created tools that really hovered around the artistic notion to a degree. Of course, again, we have this problem with classical art and the tradition of art, whereby how do you define art easily and quickly? Purpose, function. So in that case, of course, that's food, right? So the function is quite explicit. But nevertheless, the creativity in the structuring of material and the technique. I mean,
but it's not just that, though. It's also performance, because that becomes the important thing, and that's been sort of mentioned before in terms of pretending. And I'm thinking about Derrida's reading of Lacan, where Lacan says the animal cannot pretend to pretend.
Right.
Animals cannot pretend, according to Lacan. Yeah. Of course, it's completely wrong, but it's a kind of tripling almost that Lacan sees as the difference between human and animal, which Derrida then goes into to challenge, and that is a performance that to step out and acknowledge something as a performance.
Yeah.
But I thought that was why I thought it was really interesting that you used sort of performance-based creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway,
I think Wendy's being. Do you want to grab the microphone?
Thanks. 3 points and then a question. 3 points and a question to you. One, the sort of certainly going back at least to the Romantics distinction between, say, art and philosophy or other forms of knowledge, is that art is world-revealing. And one could certainly say that evolution is learning and is world-revealing, in fact. That's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is that deception goes all the way down. A virus deceives your immune receptors. Hang on a sec, sorry. I'm just getting a bit
Too
tired.
many points in one go.
I just wanted to just make these points. Oh yes, that's right. The other point I wanted to make in reference to what you said, Ron, is that we need a different conception of mind. We need a sense of mind as absolutely not locked inside a skull, but as part of a network mesh involving physical objects, non-physical objects, ideas, that sort of thing. And my fourth thing is to ask you. You did say, didn't you, that Bertrand Russell said that somewhere or other that the difference between animals and humans is that animals can't make deductions. Is that what you said?
No, it's
what
inference.
Did you say?
Inference.
Oh yes, okay, well inferences, logical inferences he meant.
Yes.
Yes, I just want to draw your attention to another account of logical inference used by Peirce, used by Russell, Nord Russell Hansen, who influenced Kuhn, used by Bateson, which is abductive inference, which is logical, but it's not mathematical or linguistic.
Sure. That was just the initiation, I just put it in as
I just wanted to
absolutely.
chuck that in there.
Yeah. Does it go over there? Do you want to? Oh, just it's right behind you. You want to just travel it that way?
Thanks both of you. It was really good. I enjoyed the points you were making. I don't know if this comes out as a question or not. Picking up what Wendy commented as well, it makes sense to think mind in a new way. And it's funny that, you know, this stuff has been going on now in robotics and artificial intelligence research. There's kind of two key already earlier moments when that happened. First earlier, kind of a more recent one was in British cybernetics.
Yes.
Where they did this in terms of, you know, before artificial intelligence research picked it up, they were doing this in extended embodied perceptive robotics. But the earlier one is, of course, Andy Burton. And his kind of ideas in terms of instinct and intelligence are exactly this kind of same discussion that was going on around 20s and 30s. This is one interesting point in terms of what you were mapping of the early 20th century discussion having with philosophy and animals, and bringing out that actually it's a funny thing that, you know, it's all about the animal. Those kind of big questions, both in the lineage that goes from Heidegger to Derrida and so forth, but also the kind of parallel lineage that are, you know, Deleuzians, go back to Whitehead, go back to Bergson and so forth. They're both discussing the animal, and sometimes even the same animal, or the same tick, for example. I wonder if, you know, do you have any comment on that? Because these are the two, that's what's been, you know, in terms of philosophical discussions, Whitehead is back and so forth, and as Stephen Shaviro's wonderful, you know, explication of the importance of Whitehead, he starts with this philosophical imaginary that, you know, what if, instead of Heidegger, we started reading Whitehead in the same way, how our philosophical work would be different. But how would you comment on these? Because these seem to be the kind of, the way they see the animal, Bergson, Heidegger, in other words, phenomenology, but also these non-phenomenologists. But they seem to be agreeing so much. Do you have any clarification on this, or kind of ideas of how to think this complex 20th century philosophy and animal?
I don't know how direct or indirect this will be. I just came about 2 weeks ago. There was the SLSA conference, which always has a series of Whitehead panels, and also has animal panels, which they would talk to each other a bit more. But I'm intrigued in Agamben's The Open, at the beginning gesture, and then a bit throughout, of this question of the end of history, or the end of culture, right? Which is the collapse of the human into the animal. And perhaps one of the challenges, fundamental challenges, earlier you were talking about the idea that animal art is part of a bigger art world, and I think that's certainly true. But I think one of the interesting, unique challenges is that the animal presents an end to art. Is a sort of final, it can be seen as a final frontier. That is, if we think of art as a human project, and this is the sort of gesture back and forth that's being done here, if we see it as a human project, then to engage the animal is to engage that very limit, right? And so in philosophy, whether Whitehead or the Heideggerian strand, it is to think the limit of philosophy itself, which of course is very Heideggerian, post-Nietzsche, or Nietzsche/post-Nietzsche project that Heidegger was involved in with his Nietzsche seminars and other ways. So I think in that way the animal poses this question of the role of thought, the role of philosophy, the role of the human, and that addresses to some degree the question earlier of what is this post-humanism, or what is this question of the post-human that's been kicked around, if it is simply a conceptual limit or horizon.
Can I just comment on that?
Because
no, but it's this thing of the question of the animals being, in a way, part and parcel of the discussion, or historical discussion, and also of art. I mean, if you go to someone like Adorno, for example, there, art that doesn't represent animals at all rubs on this human-animal rupture or distinction that's sort of he sees that as a kind of origin of the artwork. So for him, that kind of all kind of work is sort of all kind of autonomous modernist work for him is or avant-garde work is a kind of reminder of this rupture between nature and culture in a way. So, so there it is central and not just a theme.
You're going to Maria.
Thanks. One comment and one question. The comment, I wanted to go back to the metaphor of the bubbles, and only because I have a 5-year-old that enjoys them, and I thought that maybe it would be helpful to think about how actually bubbles come out when you blow them, because they sometimes come in clusters, all mixed and sort of merge. So maybe there's a point of thinking about the permeability of bubbles. And that also reminded me of a story that was on the BBC webpage a few weeks ago about the possibility of our universe being a bubble that it's at some point was connected to other bubbles, and there is proof of the scar, at the end of the universe in which it was connected. So just to think about the metaphor of bubbles. And now the question. I'm going home very happy, but also very worried. Happy because I think that we've sort of completed a circle in our questioning about animals in a way. Because if we started saying there's no relationship, there's this division between, we've all been criticizing and sort of, trying to dismantle this idea of the division between animals and humans, and then we came up with the idea of the relation as a sort of way to reconstruct the different ethics. The conclusion here is that actually there's also the space of the non-relatable. I mean, there are moments in which we cannot relate to them, which I think is very helpful for the ethical concern, but is very worrying for the cognitive project. Because if we end up, and I'm very happy about that, but I'm a scientist and I know that I'm surrounded by artists. If the ethical concern is sort of dismantled from the knowing cognitive project, then what are scientists going to do thereafter? Come to artists' seminars, I guess, or something like that.
That's part of the plan.
Just wanted to quickly pick you up on a comment you made a moment ago about the animal in the sense representing, I think you said, the end point for art. And I wondered why you would think that was the case, as opposed to, say, inanimate stuff representing an end point for art. Because in a sense, as manifestly recognisable life forms, animals would seem to be an awful lot closer to humans than a lot of other stuff in the world might.
Yeah, animals provide the opportunity and invitation to extend our mode of comportment beyond the human. And certainly in things like chain bands, survivor matter, works like that, there's that more extended conversation and certain whitehead is a part and so forth. But I think it's because of this nearness and farness of the animal, the problem of is it a metaphor or is it literal description, that lure of analogy that we link in the animal, that it offers us this opportunity or invitation to extend thought in that way. So I do appreciate it's a very helpful comment. Even Giovanni did a wonderful issue on plants, and so extending this.
I just wanted to follow on from that comment, don't make that really. And it relates to something you were saying about kind of global ecologies really, beyond urban space and time. I mean, it does, I think a very common experience living in cities is a kind of ontological loneliness, in a sense. So, just following on from your question, it sort of opens things up beyond urban space in that sense.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think, you know, the project Uncertainty in the City, which we've been talking about, is that it's important to realize that. And sensory apparatus, non-human or technological sensory apparatus that is being deployed throughout cities now to get a sense that it's a much more responsive and vital world in a variety of ways. Helps us to reanimate the world in a way that, you know, it's not just us. But, you know, ultimately, living in our soap bubbles can be lonely, I think, too, you know, because we're each, as Nagel will say in his essay, Voice Cries Out in the Wilderness, Locke's contest at Deserto. We each live in our own deserts, but are voicing that to one another.
Yeah, I mean, you can go an entire day easily without coming into contact with alterity, just kind of human continuity. And in a context of mass extinctions.
Apart from your iPhone.
Yeah, but in a context of mass extinctions, I think this is kind of crucial.
That's right, and it's one of the reasons we need to put species that are starting to get extinct, we need to get them on Twitter.
Can I just say something? It's just sort of very quickly, I've kind of lost the train of thought, but going back to what Ricker was saying about the idea of art, and in a way thinking about the bowerbirds, I mean, I don't see it as entrapment, I actually think it's about decisions, where sort of there's something on the market, they're offering up something, the animal then makes a decision whether it encounters a relationship with the other bird or not, but it's about a decision of what's attractive, like feathers or whatever. So it may be, you know, art is the wrong word, but there is this kind of thing of decisions rather than entrapment. Where I see entrapment working with animals and human animals is when we see the performances from the 1970s, or when humans engage with animals. That's when the entrapment actually happens, when sort of are trying to work or exchange or have performances, or the animal always comes out worse. It always is trapped in the cage or killed or whatever. That's where the trap for me, that's where it's.
Because, like I say, I don't think a trap is a bad thing. I think a trap can be a trap of form.
Well, of course, or where the spider feeds as well. But I think sort of the thing with the bowerbird I thought was interesting, there's a payoff, there's an exchange going on. There's a kind of, it's sort of a market, there's a marketplace, and that's what the arts is about as well, it's about that exchange of market, ideas or...
That's why I thought it was an interesting example within the context of what I was expressing, because that's pretty much, because there is a transaction of some description involved, it's as close as it could get to the idea of contemporary art as we have it. So effectively there is, and also the freedom, I think, like Rick had pointed out, this idea of the performativity of the spiders, which is crucial, because Agamben depicts the spider as passive, doing something clumsily and just sitting on it because there's nowhere else to go, and then something happens. And of course, you know, that footage shows you an alternative. But my question as well in presenting that footage is, of course, with the knowledge that it's wildlife documentary. There's a narrative, there is an entrapment again. It's not the truth. And it might be a completely not faithful narrative to what's going on. Nevertheless, it is something to hold on to for the time being. For another 20 years until we discover new technologies that will tell us more.
Yeah, and I thought that is interesting how we look at wildlife documentaries, because I remember in Minding Animals, there was a guy talking, he was outraged about the lyrebird, sort of where David Attenborough just comes across him in a forest. And apparently it was 14 hours worth of different footage.
Put together, absolutely.
So, you know, what we're looking at isn't actually...
Well, there is actually one of the sequences in the bolus spider. I kept thinking, how did you film that? The moth that arrives, and then it's missed the first time around, and then it's caught the second time around. I thought, you must have diverted that moth towards that spider in one way or another. And it's definitely full of mysteries, and even, you know, at the end of like wildlife documentaries now, it has become a bit of a cliche that there is a little sequence that shows you how it's done, and that to me falsifies the whole thing twice, because it's like, that's not how it's done. Give me the tank. I know there was a tank with some lights on it, and it was done in a studio, and I wouldn't mind. I still think that is a truth as much as Agamben's and as much as Adam's. My point was to actually show three different truths that stand independently, and they are very different according to the point of view and the aim of what each truth is trying to provide. But nevertheless, yes, in terms of defining mapping Umwelt, there is a lot to be said in terms of where we stop and where a lot of the invisible takes place. And that is the interesting thing.
I thought you gave Kant's third critique a good kick in the shins.
Did I?
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions or points? Anything?
Maybe just a
great
on the wildlife film stuff. It's
sure.
Probably obvious, but I think it's worth thinking about the power of narration as well, particularly when we're looking at examples from Edinburgh, and sort of how helpless the viewer is when that narrative is sort of withheld.
Absolutely.
So every one of those events that are pieced together to assemble that carefully crafted narrative in each of those examples is facilitated by that narration. And I noticed I'm very sensitive to anthropomorphism as well, and I noticed there was one moment when Edinburgh describes the lyrebird's fondness for fungi.
Yeah.
And he's very fond of fungi. Really? Like, it's such a loaded term, but I mean, and when you listen to Edinburgh talk about anthropomorphism, he seems to have quite a firm stand on it. In other words, you have to be careful. But then you hear lines like that, and it's like he kind of has it both ways.
You're right, but it's about the sort of institutional theory of art, isn't it? Attenborough is the institution, and he has to decide what to say firmly in order first to entertain you and inform you. Those are the two reasons why usually all of us watch natural wildlife documentaries. And you're right, I would love to have Attenborough saying, well, actually, option A, the bird is doing this. Option B, it's doing that. Option C might be doing neither. Press your red button and tell us which one you think it's, happening. But of course, it wouldn't quite fit the format. The documentary will last forever. People will just switch on to, some other program. It's just too much work. Just tell me what it is. I think there is definitely a play of dynamics there where we want to be told the truth. And we watch those documentaries. That's why, I can't do the same tomorrow as well, even if I'd like to, and at the same credibility. People will be like, really, and, how do you get this knowledge? But, of course, it's a different kettle of fish for them.
And the other representational issue with wildlife films is how do you visually portray examples of animal mind? Because what we see are animals doing things. We don't see footage of an animal just sitting there with all the biological imperatives taken care of and just in a sort of ponderous moment, because visually, when there's nothing happening, we like to see animals moving, doing things, moving things
That's
around.
true of humans too. In visual media, we don't see how people think, we watch them moving around.
Exactly, but when we see a person just sitting there staring into middle distance, we'll often say, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, well, you might say the same thing to an animal.
You could,
you could, absolutely, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I think we'll miss David Attenborough and when it's on.
You can have all the DVD box sets and continue. Well, there's definitely, I think, fair play. Within that genre, it's a great achievement. And I think the most precious thing is to actually now be able to see those spiders in action. Then what you make of what you see and your interpretation and level of closeness.
Yeah, we know all that stuff, that there are lights and sound recordings and it takes hours. You know that already when you watch it.
But nevertheless, I think if you look, I've watched wildlife documentaries since I was 3, and then I remember there was a dip when I turned 12 or 13 and I switched onto MTV, and it was kind of like fighting myself, go back to the MTV. But at the same time, when you watch it from day one, of course all that fictionalization is not so apparent, like a language that kind of is born with you and not acquired, and you don't question it very much. So it takes quite a lot of deconstruction sometimes to really break down certain things. But nevertheless, I think when I was a child, I would never see the bolus spider just because the technology wasn't, this spider is really like this. So just the fact that we're aware now that this thing exists challenges what I think. I'd like to see that challenging what a philosopher can write about the animal. And I don't know whether that's a possibility or whether that's not.
That's going on. That is going on.
Is it?
Would you have any thoughts on the grizzly man?
Sorry?
Would you have any thoughts on grizzly man?
What, in the fact that he was
As a
killed?
nature documentary,
In what respect? Well, all the same.
in comparison to Edinburgh.
Tim Morton writes some interesting stuff on grizzly man, his latest book.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite honest the way he's portraying the animals.
Well, we don't go as far as using the word honesty, but I think there is a point, you know, with regards to the philosophical argument, and we go back to Derrida again, and animal, and, you know, the word animal not capturing the totality of animals, and therefore having to break down these arguments. I think that was part of wanting to be provocative with this idea of the spider. Agamben just says the spider. And I wonder if there is an inadequacy in actually just writing something like Agamben did and just referring to it as the spider. Because to me, it really falls flat immediately, but that's because I've been lucky enough to actually play with spiders in my life and also watch documentaries which tell me certain things I question, but nevertheless I have a certain range of diverse spiders which Agamben doesn't provide. Now my doubt is whether there is an avenue there for philosophy to fragment that further and actually, you know, let's write a book about philosophy and all the different spiders and, you know, and see if...
Why don't you do it?
Because I'm still finishing something else. Nevertheless, I think there was a point to what I was about to say, which is that effectively, as I said, Agamben's argument goes well beyond, and I think that the interesting side is where he comes back into the human. So that is definitely what I would say out of all that. But I think there is definitely an issue to be addressed within the animal aspect of the argument. So hence, Joe.
I'd like to pick up on the point that Steve made, where I think what you said, if I got you correctly, is that it's not necessarily about the individual, but about the species. There are two things about that. First of all, I'm interested in how readily we accept the concept of species, which is a totally artificial human construction, and how, you know, readily we accept it in these conversations. The second issue is I'm not sure it's not about the individual. I mean, the first thing that was shown there in all these presentations was the photograph of the village street. And it said, this is a village street, when in fact it's not, it's a photograph of a village street. And if you and I walked down that same village street, we would see different things. We would have a totally different experience as two individuals. So, you know, even that, between two of us, of sort of the same thing that we have called a species, have different Umwelts. And now we're trying to understand from a simple picture what the Umwelt of, you know, 20 million different spiders of the same, of what we call the same species are, and then between species. This seems like a sort of a hill to climb, which is impossible to the point of silliness. So, you know, it's not clear what we're trying to achieve by trying to understand these Umwelts.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if I should, well, I'll just say something, then I agree with you to a degree, it's impossible. It's like wanting to really write the encyclopedia of the world and finishing it. But nevertheless, I think, for example, what the spiders show is that, you know, you don't necessarily need to go and collect all the spiders, but just collecting like a few already puts a few questions into the machine. And I think that's where I'd like to be at this stage. Where I'd like to be in 20 years, I'm not sure. But
I think this is a discussion that you and I have had online. that, you know, there seems to be this belief floating around that the more we know about the materiality, the physical science of these animals, the more helpful it is. My position is this has nothing to do with their materiality. It has all to do with what we make of it. It's our interpretation which determines our relationship with them.
Sure.
Not their materiality.
I can't remember what I responded if you put the same question when we had this discussion online, but say, well, in that case, if you're not concerned with their materiality entirely, you're going to classical mythology where you can have a dragon. You know, because you can effectively create the animal out of the blue and just patch it together. And I think there is a level of materiality that matters. Then, of course, we've established that you can't get into that level of materiality or into a deeper level, but I think some level of materiality matters.
Well, but, you know, the discussion that we had online, I seem to remember, was we need to understand whether plants are sentient, because that determines how we might relate to them. Well, it only determines how we might relate to them if a priori we've decided that sentience is important.
Sure.
So it's not the fact that they're sentient that's actually important, it's our prior decision that sentience is an important criteria.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely. I think there's quite a queue now of comments, so I think...
And it's thinking about the constructions that you get in programs like Spring Watch and Autumn Watch, which I think one of the things that's very interesting about them is making the apparently ordinary extraordinary, and it is actually in different ways, and we may be critical of some of this, but of actually talking about sort of different individual animals within a group of animals and how they're reacting differently. I've done things, for example, on sort of urban foxes, and this fox does this, and clearly this one is doing this sort of thing, this is this sort of fox, and this has got a different personality. So I know that's not the same thing as the discussion has now moved on to, but if you can get even within the genre of nature documentary, that type of thinking, I think see that as something then positive around the sorts of things you're thinking about, and this idea around sort of individuals and moving away from the groups.
Entirely agree, and like Rosemary introduced the idea of the trap, and effectively the video camera, the camera and the frame in which the spider moves is a trap, and you can't escape it in whichever way. You can even like go all the way down to vision. Our vision is a trap for ourselves. So all you can do is try to improve and neutralize certain parameters in order to distance yourself from certain elements, which I don't even want to get into right now. Wendy.
Yes, coming back to this Umwelt point you raised, Ron did try and answer this. I mean, there's a basic level at which the problem of the question of species is problematic to a degree. But I mean, what you're talking about is you're talking about the sensory equipment that each kind of creature has evolved in order to get by in the world, in order to, to live, to mate, etc. Beyond that, and as Ron said, there is room, isn't there, for thinking about the individuality of creatures. But I mean, I think I think of it, and I think that this is what Ron was trying to say when he said, well, Uexku does say at the end, he talks about the Umwelt of a little girl and the Umwelt of the lumberjack or whatever, that one can at least think of it in terms of signifying environments that are sort of nested, that there's one at the level of, let's say, species, that even if it's problematic, it's not entirely problematic, we understand what we mean by a human species, or
we've created that.
Yes, we all need fresh air. And you're probably happy as well to know that I don't believe in kind of recapping the content of the symposium, just because I really appreciate each individual postmodernist perception of whatever you have seen today and your own personal perspective. So I won't try to superimpose my own. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the speakers once again for the fantastic presentations. And thank you, of course, all for coming and spending the day here talking about animals that most of which are not talked about as much as they deserve. Thanks to Minding Animal, Rod Benson, standing at the back, who wants to say something.
Thank Giovanni for all
thank
the
you.
work.
Yeah.
That's appreciated. Thank you very much. That's it. It's over. All of duty.
Whoever's coming to dinner, just send me an info.
How are you feeling?
Nearly passing out.
Oops. Steve, you and I are
tiger and the lion.
Excuse me. I'm so sorry. That's all right.
Kind of like harness together, like throwing each other in, saying, oh, let's do this, let's do that. But I didn't okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, good. So I'll just email you. I really enjoyed that. Yes. Okay, if you just send me an email for that, I will be happy
Does anyone know?
We should have done it before, like in the coffee break. Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun. Yeah. Okay, correct. Thanks. Yeah, so you get a shit off, right? Well, it's been a pleasure. Hope you enjoyed. Take care and see you soon. Thanks for coming down again.
Yeah. So it's about where? Yeah.
I actually thought so.